The screams of panic echoed through the night as smoke billowed from the trading post, flames licking at the wooden structure that had stood for nearly 20 years. Lillian Palmer clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she ran, her heart thundering in her chest. Behind her, the sound of hooves pounded against the hard, packed earth her pursuers were gaining on her. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and Lillian had just witnessed something she was never meant to see. The desert scrubland offered little cover in the pale moonlight. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled over rocks and dry brush, the hem of her once fine blue dress catching on thorny vegetation. The fabric tore with a sickening rip, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. The men chasing her had already killed Mr. Finch, the kindly store owner who had given her a job when she arrived in Copper Springs 3 months ago. She went this way, a gruff voice called out behind her. Lillian veered toward a cluster of boulders, praying she could hide among them until the danger passed. Her foot caught on a stone, sending her tumbling down a small ravine. Pain shot through her as she rolled, sharp rocks cutting into her skin. When she finally came to a stop, her dress was torn in several places, and she could feel the warm trickle of blood on her cheek from a deep cut. Disoriented and in pain, she pushed herself up against a boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible. The sound of horses grew closer, and Lillian held her breath, tears streaming silently down her face, mixing with the blood from her cut. "Check down there." The voice was closer now. Light from a lantern swept across the rocks near her hiding place. Lillian closed her eyes, certain that discovery meant death. The light moved away, but she knew they wouldn't give up the search. She needed to move to find somewhere safer, but her body refused to cooperate. Her ankle throbbed, possibly sprained in the fall. The next sound she heard wasn't the angry voices of her pursuers, but the soft crunch of boots on gravel. A shadow fell across her, and Lillian looked up, expecting to see one of the men who had chased her from the trading post. Instead, she found herself staring into the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Don't move, miss," the man whispered, drawing his revolver as he crouched beside her. From his vantage point, he surveyed the area, then turned his attention back to her. In the dim moonlight, he took in her condition: the torn dress, the cut on her face, the fear in her eyes. "You're safe now," the cowboy said, his voice low and steady. "I promise they won't hurt you." Lillian wanted to believe him, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere, but trust didn't come easily in her world. Not anymore. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Lucas Pearson," he replied, his eyes never stopping their vigilant scan of their surroundings. "And we need to move before those men find us both." Without waiting for her response, Lucas holstered his gun and gently lifted her into his arms. Lillian stiffened, her instinct to fight, but the pain in her ankle and the reality of her situation overrode her fear of this stranger. She was in no position to escape on her own. "My horse is hidden just over the ridge," he explained, moving carefully through the darkness. "Can you tell me who's after you?" "Men from the trading post," Lillian whispered, her voice trembling. "They killed Mr. Finch." "I saw them do it, and they saw me." Lucas's jaw tightened. Finch was a good man. They reached his horse, a large black gelding that stood quietly waiting. With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Lucas helped Lillian onto the saddle before mounting behind her. "I have a cabin about 5 miles from here," he said. "We can hide there until it's safe." As they rode away from the ravine, Lillian could hear the frustrated shouts of the men searching for her. She leaned back slightly, drawing comfort from the solid presence of the cowboy behind her. She didn't know if she could trust him, but at that moment, she had little choice. The cabin Lucas had mentioned was nestled in a small grove of cottonwood trees, providing natural cover from anyone passing by. It was simple but sturdy, with a stone chimney rising from the center of the roof. Lucas helped Lillian dismount, supporting her weight as she limped toward the door. Inside, a single room served as living space, kitchen, and sleeping quarters. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, a small cupboard, and a bed filled the rest of the space. Lucas settled Lillian in a chair before lighting a lantern. "Let me take a look at that cut," he said, filling a basin with water from a pitcher. Lillian sat still as he gently cleaned the blood from her face. His hands were calloused but careful, his touch light as he examined the cut on her cheek. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said after a moment. "Facial cuts tend to bleed a lot." "Thank you," Lillian said, finally finding her voice. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Lucas's expression darkened. "I have a pretty good idea, and it wouldn't have been anything good." He paused, wringing out a cloth. "Can you tell me what happened at the trading post?" Lillian took a deep breath. "I worked for Mr. Finch. This evening, after we closed the store, 3 men came. I recognized them as riders from the Hawk Ranch. They demanded Mr. Finch give them something. I couldn't hear what. When he refused, Her voice caught. "They shot him. I was in the storeroom, and they didn't know I was there until I knocked over a crate trying to escape." Lucas nodded, his expression grim. "The Hawk Ranch has been causing trouble in these parts for a while now. Their foreman, Silas Quinn, is a ruthless man." "I need to tell the sheriff," Lillian said, attempting to stand. Lucas gently pressed her back into the chair. "You will, but not tonight. Those men are still looking for you, and Copper Springs is the first place they'll watch. We need to wait until it's safe." "But Mr. Finch is beyond our help now," Lucas said softly. "I'm sorry, but you can't help him by getting yourself killed." Lillian knew he was right, but the thought of hiding while Mr. Finch's killers roamed free made her stomach turn. She had come to Copper Springs seeking a fresh start after leaving behind a troubled past in St. Louis. Now, once again, she found herself caught in circumstances beyond her control. "You should rest," Lucas said, interrupting her thoughts. "Take the bed, I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue, Lillian allowed Lucas to help her to the narrow bed. He covered her with a worn quilt, then moved to the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. "Mr. Pearson," she called softly. He turned, his face half in shadow. "Lucas," he corrected. "Lucas," she repeated. "Why did you help me? You could have just ridden past." His expression softened slightly. "That's not the kind of man I am, Miss Palmer," she supplied. "Lillian Palmer, Miss Palmer," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Get some sleep. We have decisions to make come morning." As Lillian drifted into an exhausted sleep, her last conscious thought was of those blue eyes that had found her in the darkness, and the steady voice that had promised safety. The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin's single window when Lillian awoke. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings causing a brief surge of panic, until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her body. Her ankles still throbbed, but the pain had subsided to a dull ache. The cut on her face felt tight, and her once beautiful dress was beyond repair, torn in multiple places and stained with dirt and blood. Lucas was seated at the table, cleaning a rifle with practiced efficiency. He looked up as she stirred, setting aside his task. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I've been better," Lillian admitted, "but I'll survive. Thank you again for helping me." Lucas nodded, rising to pour a cup of coffee from the pot simmering on the small stove. He handed it to her, and Lillian accepted gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "I need to check on something," Lucas said, moving toward the door. Stay inside and keep away from the window. I won't be long." Before Lillian could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the lingering scent of gunpowder and coffee. Lucas returned less than an hour later, his expression grave as he removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "I rode close enough to see the trading post," he reported. "It's burned to the ground. There's a crowd gathered, including the sheriff." Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. "They burned it, with Mr. Finch inside," Lucas nodded grimly. "Most likely trying to cover up what they did." "But they won't expect a witness." "We need to go to the sheriff," Lillian insisted. "Not yet," Lucas countered. "I know Sheriff Taylor. He's a good man, but he's also cautious. If Quinn's men are watching him, approaching now would put you in danger." He sat down across from her. "We need a plan. I can't just hide here while they get away with murder." "You won't have to hide for long," Lucas assured her. "I have a friend in Tucson who's a federal marshal. I can get word to him, and he can come with the authority to arrest Quinn and his men, regardless of who they work for or how much influence they have locally." Lillian studied Lucas, trying to understand this man who had risked his own safety to help a stranger. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength that spoke of years spent in the harsh environment of the Arizona Territory. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at both hardship and laughter. But it was those eyes themselves, a clear, startling blue, that captured her attention. They were honest eyes, she decided. Eyes that had seen much but remained unclouded by cynicism. "You seem to know a lot about how these things work," she observed. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "I used to wear a badge myself, up in Colorado. I've seen what happens when men like Quinn think they are above the law." "You were a lawman. What brought you here?" Lucas's expression closed off slightly. "That's a story for another time." He stood, ending the conversation. "You need clean clothes and proper food. I have a spare shirt you can wear until we can get you something more suitable. And I should check that ankle properly." Lillian recognized the deflection, but didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. She certainly did. Lucas's shirt was comically large on her slender frame, but it was clean and whole, which was more than could be said for her ruined dress. After a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits, Lucas carefully examined her ankle, confirming it was sprained but not broken. "You're lucky," he said, wrapping it with a strip of cloth. "A broken ankle out here can be a death sentence." "I don't feel particularly lucky," Lillian replied with a wry smile. Lucas looked up, and something in his expression caught her off guard, a warmth quickly masked. "You survived," he said simply. "That's more than can be said for poor Finch." The day passed slowly. Lucas left again to send a message to his marshal friend, returning with supplies and news that the town was buzzing with talk of the trading post fire. The official story was that Finch had fallen asleep with a lit pipe, causing the fire, but few believed it. "Quinn's men are still in town," Lucas reported. "They're asking questions about a woman they're saying you worked for Finch and disappeared with money from the till." Lillian's eyes flashed with anger. "That's absurd. Mr. Finch was like a father to me. I would never steal from him. They're trying to frame you to give themselves a reason to be looking for you. It's a smart play, makes them seem like they're on the right side of the law. What do we do now?" "We wait," Lucas said, his voice steady. "My message to Marshal Davis should reach him in a day or two. In the meantime, we stay out of sight." Waiting proved more difficult than Lillian anticipated. The cabin, which had seemed spacious enough when she first arrived, grew smaller with each passing hour. Lucas did his best to keep her comfortable, sharing books from his small collection and telling stories of his travels throughout the West, carefully avoiding any mention of his time as a lawman. In turn, Lillian spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's work as a printer, and her mother's death from influenza when Lillian was 16. She didn't mention the events that had driven her west, and Lucas didn't ask, respecting the boundaries she set. On the third day of their isolation, Lucas returned from checking his traps with a rabbit for their supper. As he prepared the meat, Lillian watched his hands, strong, capable hands that moved with surprising grace. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, attempting to fill the comfortable silence that had developed between them. Lucas smiled slightly. "My mother taught me the basics, said no son of hers would starve for lack of knowing how to feed himself. The rest I picked up on the trail. You're full of surprises, Mr. Pearson." "Lucas," he corrected, glancing up from his work. "After sharing a cabin for 3 days, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Lucas," Lillian agreed, finding she liked the sound of his name on her lips. That evening, as they shared their simple meal, Lucas asked the question she had been dreading. "What brought you to Copper Springs, Lillian? It's not exactly a destination for a refined woman from St. Louis." Lillian set down her fork, considering her answer carefully. "I needed a fresh start," she finally said. "After my father died 2 years ago, I found myself in difficult circumstances." She hesitated, then decided that Lucas deserved at least part of the truth. "I became engaged to a man my father had trusted, his business partner. Charles seemed kind at first, but after we were engaged, he changed." Lucas's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "He became controlling, possessive. When I tried to break the engagement, he threatened me, said he owned me." Lillian's voice faltered. "One night he had been drinking heavily. He struck me, and I knew then that I had to leave. I took what little money I had saved and boarded a train west the next morning." "Did he follow you?" Lillian shook her head. "I don't think so. I changed my name. Palmer was my mother's maiden name, and I didn't leave a trail. Copper Springs was as far as my money would take me, and Mr. Finch offered me a job and a room above the store when he heard I could read and write and keep accounts." Lucas's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not pity but understanding and a quiet respect that warmed her more than she cared to admit. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for," he said softly. Lillian looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I was desperate, not brave." "Sometimes they're the same thing." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but something had changed between them. A trust had been established, fragile but real. That night, as Lillian lay on the bed and Lucas on his bedroll near the door, she found herself studying his profile in the dim light from the dying fire. There was something undeniably appealing about this solitary cowboy with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. "Lucas," she called softly, uncertain if he was still awake. He turned his head toward her. "Yes, thank you for everything." In the shadows she couldn't see his expression, but his voice was warm when he replied, "Get some sleep, Lillian. Tomorrow's another day." The next morning broke clear and cold, a reminder that autumn was advancing in the high desert. Lillian awoke to find Lucas already up, a worried frown creasing his forehead as he peered out the window. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up quickly. "Riders," he replied, his voice tense. "Coming this way." Lillian's heart raced as she joined him at the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. 3 men on horseback were approaching the cabin, their pace unhurried but purposeful. "Quinn's men," she whispered. Lucas shook his head. "I don't think so. One of them looks like Marshal Davis, but I can't be sure from this distance." He reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded before heading to the door. "Stay inside," he instructed Lillian. "If anything happens, there's a trapdoor under the rug that leads to a root cellar. Hide there until it's safe." Before she could protest, Lucas was out the door, rifle held casually but ready. Lillian watched through the window as he positioned himself near the corner of the cabin, waiting as the riders drew closer. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting, and Lucas's posture relaxed slightly. Lillian released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. These weren't Quinn's men. Lucas conversed briefly with the visitors, then waved toward the cabin. Taking this as a signal that it was safe, Lillian opened the door, remaining in the doorway as the men dismounted. The lead rider was a tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. The other two men were younger, with the weathered look of experienced lawmen. "Miss Palmer," Lucas called. "This is Marshal James Davis. He's come to help us." Relief flooded through Lillian as she stepped forward to greet the marshal. Finally, there was a chance for justice for Mr. Finch. Marshal Davis removed his hat respectfully. "Miss Palmer, Lucas has informed me of your situation. I'm sorry for what you've endured." "Thank you for coming, Marshal," Lillian replied. "I'm ready to tell you everything I saw." The marshal nodded, his expression grave. "We'll need your full statement, but first, we need to get you somewhere safer. Quinn's men have been asking questions all over the county. It won't be long before they think to look here." "Where will we go?" Lillian asked, looking to Lucas. "Davis has a place in mind," Lucas answered, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a day's ride from here." The marshal cleared his throat. "My deputies and I need to gather more evidence before confronting Quinn. We'll escort you to a ranch owned by a friend of mine, where you can stay until we're ready to make arrests." Lillian nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach at the thought of leaving the safety of Lucas's cabin and Lucas himself. "When do we leave?" she asked. "As soon as you're ready," the marshal replied. "The sooner we get you to safety, the better." Lucas disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a small bundle of Lillian's few possessions and some provisions for the journey. He helped her mount his black gelding, then swung up behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. The small party set out, riding at a steady pace through the rugged landscape. Marshal Davis led the way, with his deputies flanking them, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. As they rode, Lillian found herself acutely aware of Lucas's proximity. His chest was solid against her back, his breath warm on her neck when he leaned forward to speak to her. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she felt drawn to this man who had risked his safety for hers without hesitation. "Who are we going to?" she asked over her shoulder. "An old friend of Davis's," Lucas replied. "Thomas Green runs a small ranch about 40 miles east of here. It's isolated enough that Quinn's men won't think to look there, and Green has enough hands to provide protection if they do." They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. By late afternoon, Lillian's body ached from the long hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Every mile they covered took them farther from the danger in Copper Springs. The sun was setting when they crested a ridge and saw the Green Ranch spread out before them, a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley, surrounded by grazing land and protected by natural rock formations on 3 sides. "We made it," Lucas murmured, his relief evident. As they approached, a man emerged from the main house, a shotgun held ready but not aimed. Marshal Davis raised a hand in greeting, and the man, presumably Thomas Green, lowered his weapon. "James," he called, "didn't expect to see you so soon." "We have the situation I told you about," Davis replied as they drew closer. Green nodded, his gaze moving from the marshal to Lucas and Lillian. He was an older man, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the Arizona sun. "Welcome to Circle G," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. Any friend of James is welcome here. The ranch house was larger than Lucas's cabin, built of adobe with a wooden porch that wrapped around two sides. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with an air of settled permanence that Lillian found instantly reassuring. Green's wife, Martha, a small woman with kind eyes and capable hands, immediately took charge of seeing to Lillian's comfort, providing her with clean clothes and preparing a hot bath. "You poor dear," she clucked sympathetically as she helped Lillian wash her hair. "James told us what happened. Such terrible business." The warmth of the bath and Martha's maternal fussing brought tears to Lillian's eyes, tears she had been holding back since witnessing Mr. Finch's murder. Martha tactfully pretended not to notice, continuing her gentle chatter about inconsequential matters until Lillian regained her composure. Dressed in borrowed clothes that fit her far better than Lucas's shirt had, Lillian joined the men in the main room, where they were deep in discussion around the dining table. "The problem is evidence," Marshal Davis was saying. "Miss Palmer's testimony is crucial, but it's her word against Quinn's. We need more." "What about the men who were with Quinn that night?" Lucas asked. "One of them might be persuaded to talk. If we can identify them," Davis agreed. "Miss Palmer, did you recognize any of the men with Quinn at the trading post?" Lillian stepped into the room. "Yes, I knew them by sight. They'd been to the trading post before Will Thornton and a man they called Dutch. I don't know his real name." Davis nodded, making notes. "That gives us something to work with. Thornton has a reputation as the weak link in Quinn's operation. If we can isolate him, we might get him to confess." The discussion continued through dinner, with plans being made and discarded as the complexities of bringing Quinn to justice became apparent. The Hawk Ranch was owned by an Eastern businessman who seldom visited, but had given Quinn free rein to run the operation as he saw fit. Under Quinn's leadership, the ranch had expanded aggressively, pushing smaller ranchers off their land and controlling water access throughout the region. "But why kill Mr. Finch?" Lillian asked, struggling to understand. "He was just a storekeeper." Lucas and Davis exchanged a look that told Lillian they knew more than they were saying. "Finch wasn't just a storekeeper," Lucas finally explained. "He was also gathering evidence against Quinn for the land office. We think Quinn found out." The revelation stunned Lillian. "He never told me." "He was protecting you," Davis said gently. "The less you knew, the safer you were, or so he thought." After dinner, while the men continued their planning, Martha showed Lillian to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The room was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered by a colorful quilt and a small window that looked out over the ranch yard. "You'll be safe here," Martha assured her. "Thomas has men watching the property, and your cowboy doesn't look like he'd let anything happen to you." "He's not my cowboy," Lillian protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, dear. Rest now. Tomorrow will be soon enough to worry about what comes next." Alone in the room, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing with the day's revelations. Mr. Finch had been involved in something far more dangerous than she had realized, and his death wasn't just a robbery gone wrong, it was a deliberate silencing. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said. "As well as can be expected," Lillian replied, stepping back to allow him into the room. Lucas remained in the doorway, respecting the propriety of their situation despite the intimacy they had shared in his cabin. "Davis has a plan," he said. "He's sending his deputies back to Copper Springs tonight to gather more information. Once they return, we'll move forward with the arrests. And until then, you stay here where it's safe." Lillian nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering her since they arrived. "Will you be staying too?" Lucas's eyes softened. "Yes. Davis asked me to stay with you while he and his men handle the investigation." The relief Lillian felt at his answer surprised her. In the short time she had known Lucas, he had become a source of stability in her upended world. "Good," she said simply. "I'm glad." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and growing feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. "Get some rest," Lucas finally said, stepping back from the doorway. "We're safe here, but it's been a long day." "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Lillian." As she closed the door behind him, Lillian leaned against it, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. She was in danger, a witness to murder. Far from home and everything familiar, she had no business feeling the flutter of attraction for a man she had known less than a week. And yet, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at his presence, or the way his blue eyes seemed to see past her defenses to the woman beneath. Sleep came eventually, but Lillian's dreams were troubled, filled with flames and shadowy pursuers, and a pair of blue eyes that promised safety amidst the chaos. The days at the Circle G ranch fell into a pattern as they waited for Marshal Davis's deputies to return with the information they needed. Lillian, unwilling to be a burden on the Greens' hospitality, insisted on helping Martha with household tasks. Her injured ankle was healing well, allowing her to move about with only a slight limp. Lucas, meanwhile, made himself useful around the ranch, helping with repairs and joining the hands on their rounds of the property. His experience was evident in everything he did, from breaking a skittish colt to mending fences with efficient precision. In the evenings, they would gather in the main room, where Thomas Green entertained them with stories of the early days of Arizona Territory, before the railroad had brought its particular brand of civilization to the frontier. It was a different world then, Green reminisced. Harder in some ways, simpler in others. A man's word was his bond, and justice was often immediate if not always fair. "You make it sound romantic," Martha chided gently. "It was mostly hard work and worry." "That too," Green conceded with a fond smile at his wife. "But we built something here, didn't we? Something that will outlast us." Lillian glanced at Lucas, wondering about his life before their paths crossed. He had shared little of his past, beyond his time as a lawman in Colorado, and she found herself increasingly curious about the man behind the calm exterior. Her opportunity to learn more came the following afternoon, when Lucas offered to show her around the ranch. With Martha's blessing and a warning not to wander too far, they set out, walking side by side through the golden autumn light. "It's beautiful here," Lillian observed as they crested a small hill that offered a view of the entire valley. "Different from St. Louis," Lucas agreed, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Very different, but there's a piece to it that I never felt back east." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you always lived in the West?" Lucas shook his head. "I was born in Pennsylvania. My father worked for the railroad. When I was 12, he was offered a position in Colorado and we moved west." His expression grew distant. "It was hard at first, adapting to the new environment, but by the time I was 15, I couldn't imagine living anywhere else." "How did you end up wearing a badge?" Lillian asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about his past. Lucas was silent for a moment, and Lillian feared she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "I was working as a ranch hand when a gang of rustlers hit the property. The sheriff formed a posse and I joined up. We tracked them for 3 days before catching up. There was a fight." He paused. "I handled myself well enough that the sheriff offered me a job as a deputy when we got back to town. You must have been good at it. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. I was. Too good, some might say. I rose quickly, became sheriff myself within 5 years. Lillian sensed there was more to the story, something painful that he was skirting around. What happened? She asked gently. Lucas stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I made a mistake, he finally said. Trusted the wrong person. It cost lives good men who were following my lead. I'm sorry, Lillian said, reaching out to touch his arm lightly. He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. After that, I couldn't wear the badge anymore. I drifted for a while, then settled here in Arizona territory. Built my cabin, kept to myself mostly. His expression softened slightly. Until I found a woman with a torn dress and a cut face hiding among the rocks. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Lillian was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his arm beneath her fingertips, of the way his eyes held hers. I'm glad you found me, she said softly. Lucas's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her. Then, a shout from the direction of the ranch house broke the spell. Riders coming in, came the call from one of Green's men. Lucas's expression shifted instantly from tender to alert. Stay close to me, he instructed, taking Lillian's hand as they hurried back toward the house. By the time they reached the yard, Marshal Davis was already greeting the newcomers, his 2 deputies, dusty from the trail but unharmed. Any trouble? Davis asked as they dismounted. None, sir, the older deputy replied, but we have news. The group moved into the house, where the deputies could report what they had learned. Lillian sat beside Lucas at the dining table, aware that what they were about to hear could determine her fate. Quinn's gotten bold, the deputy began. With Finch gone, he's moving on other small ranchers in the area, threatening some, buying out others for pennies on the dollar. And the murder investigation, Davis prompted. Sheriff Taylor is going through the motions, but he's not pushing hard. The official story is still that Finch died in an accidental fire, despite what folks are saying. And Miss Palmer? Lucas asked, his hand unconsciously moving closer to Lillian's on the table. They're still looking for her. Quinn's offering a reward for information, $50, claiming she stole from the store before running off. Lillian's indignation flared. That's absurd. I would never, we know, Davis assured her. But it gives Quinn's men a reason to be searching for you, one that most folks won't question. There's more, the younger deputy added. We managed to get Thornton alone at the saloon one night. After enough whiskey, he started talking. He didn't admit to the murder outright, but he let slip that Quinn was worried about some papers Finch had. Papers. Lillian frowned, trying to recall anything unusual about Mr. Finch's behavior before the murder. He was working on the ledgers the day before it happened. He seemed preoccupied. Could the papers still exist? Lucas asked, looking to Davis. The marshal rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If the fire was set to cover up the murder, maybe Quinn didn't find what he was looking for. Finch was a careful man. He might have hidden the evidence somewhere. The trading post is gone, Lillian reminded them. If there were papers there, they're ashes now. Unless, Lucas said slowly, Finch kept them somewhere else. Did he have another property, a bank box, anything like that? Lillian thought hard. Not that he ever mentioned, but... Her eyes widened as a memory surfaced. The day before the murder, he gave me a key for safekeeping. Said it was important and to keep it with me always. I thought it was just his cautious nature. You still have it? Davis asked, leaning forward intently. Lillian nodded, reaching for the small reticule she had managed to keep with her during her flight from the trading post. From it, she withdrew a small brass key. It doesn't look like a regular door key, she said, placing it on the table. Davis picked it up, examining it closely. It's a bank box key, he confirmed. The question is, which bank? There's only one bank in Copper Springs, Green interjected. Territorial Savings and Loan. Opened about 5 years ago. Marshall Davis nodded decisively. That gives us a plan. If Finch left evidence against Quinn in that bank box, we can use it to make our case. But we need to be careful. Quinn has eyes everywhere in Copper Springs. I'll go, Lucas volunteered. I'm not known in town the way you are, Davis. It's too dangerous, Lillian protested. If Quinn's men are watching the bank, they're looking for you, not me, Lucas pointed out. And they have no reason to connect me to Finch. Davis considered the proposal. It could work, but you shouldn't go alone. One of my deputies can accompany you, posing as a prospective land buyer. That would give you a natural reason to visit the bank. The plan was quickly formulated. Lucas and Deputy Michaels would ride to Copper Springs the next morning, presenting themselves as business partners interested in purchasing land in the area. Their visit to the bank would appear routine. Many such transactions required access to property records or secure storage of funds. As the details were finalized, Lillian found herself fighting a growing sense of dread. The logical part of her mind knew the plan was sound, but her heart rebelled at the thought of Lucas riding into danger. Later that evening, she found him on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. She wrapped a shawl Martha had loaned her around her shoulders and joined him, the night air cool against her skin. "You should be resting," Lucas said without turning. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "I couldn't sleep," Lillian admitted. "I'm worried about you going to Copper Springs." Now he did look at her, his expression softening in the moonlight. "I'll be careful. Davis's plan is solid and Deputy Michaels knows what he's doing. Quinn's men killed Mr. Finch without hesitation. If they suspect you're working against them, they won't," Lucas assured her. "I'm just a man looking to buy land, nothing more." Lillian wasn't convinced, but she knew arguing would be futile. Lucas had made his decision, and nothing she said would change it. "Just come back," she said quietly, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Lillian," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he had been about to say. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I'll come back. I promise." The touch of his hand against her cheek sent a warmth through Lillian that had nothing to do with the shawl around her shoulders. Without conscious thought, she leaned slightly into his palm. Lucas's breath caught audibly. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to Lillian's eyes. His hand cupped her face carefully, as though she were made of the finest porcelain, while his other arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, a physical expression of the connection that had been growing between them since the night he found her among the rocks. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I shouldn't have done that," Lucas said, though he made no move to release her. "Why not?" Lillian challenged softly. "Because now leaving is that much harder." Lillian smiled, her heart lighter despite her fears for tomorrow. "Then you have even more reason to come back safely." Lucas's answering smile was brief but genuine. "That I do." He stepped back reluctantly. "You should get some rest. I'll see you in the morning before I leave." Lillian nodded, though sleep seemed an even more distant prospect now than it had before. As she turned to go inside, Lucas caught her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to come back." Morning arrived with a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. Lillian rose early, determined to see Lucas off despite the heaviness in her heart. She found him in the kitchen, sharing a last cup of coffee with Deputy Michaels while they reviewed their plan once more. Lucas looked up as she entered, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "Good morning," he greeted, rising from his seat. "Good morning," Lillian replied, accepting the cup of coffee Martha handed her. "Are you leaving soon?" Lucas nodded. "In a few minutes. It's a 4-hour ride to Copper Springs. We want to arrive around midday when the bank will be busy." "Less likely to draw attention that way." Lillian nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Be careful." "I will," Lucas promised. He hesitated, then added, "We'll be back by nightfall one way or another." The unspoken implication hung in the air. If they didn't return by then, something had gone wrong. Too soon. It was time for Lucas and Deputy Michaels to depart. Lillian followed them out to the yard, where their horses were saddled and waiting. Marshal Davis gave the men final instructions while Lillian stood to one side, watching Lucas check his saddle and weapons with practiced efficiency. When the moment came for them to mount up, Lucas approached her, his expression grave. "Remember what Davis said. If we're not back by morning, he'll take you and the others to Tucson. It's safer there." "We'll be waiting for you," Lillian replied, refusing to acknowledge the possibility that he wouldn't return. Lucas glanced toward the house, where the others were giving them a moment of privacy. Without a word, he pulled Lillian into a swift embrace, his lips finding hers in a brief but fervent kiss. "For luck," he murmured against her mouth before releasing her. Then he was mounting his horse, tipping his hat to her one last time before he and Michaels rode out, leaving Lillian staring after them until they disappeared from view. The hours that followed were among the longest of Lillian's life. She tried to keep busy, helping Martha with chores and listening to Marshal Davis's stories of his years enforcing the law in the territory. But her mind remained fixed on Lucas and the dangers he might be facing in Copper Springs. By mid-afternoon, Martha took pity on her, suggesting they bake bread together, a task that required enough concentration to provide some distraction. As they worked side by side, the older woman cast knowing glances at Lillian. "He seems like a good man, your Lucas," Martha commented as they kneaded the dough. "He's not mine," Lillian protested automatically, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Martha chuckled. "If you say so, but I've been watching the two of you. There's something there, something worth holding on to." Lillian sighed, her hands working the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "Even if there is, what future could we have? Once this is over, once Quinn is arrested, I'll need to rebuild my life, and Lucas." She trailed off, uncertain. "What about Lucas?" Martha prompted gently. "I don't know what he wants. He's so private about his past, about his plans." "Have you asked him?" Lillian shook her head. "There hasn't been time. Everything's happened so quickly." Martha nodded understandingly. "Time has a way of slipping past us out here. Thomas and I had known each other barely a month when we married. Sometimes, when you find the right person, you just know." "But how can you be sure?" Lillian asked, voicing the fear that had been growing alongside her feelings for Lucas. "You can't," Martha said simply. "Not completely. Life offers no guarantees, especially out here. But when you find someone who looks at you the way that man looks at you, well, that's worth taking a chance on." Lillian contemplated Martha's words as they finished preparing the bread and set it aside to rise. There was wisdom in what the older woman said, but also risk. After her experience with Charles, Lillian had sworn never to let herself be vulnerable again. Yet with Lucas, vulnerability felt like strength, not weakness. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when a shout from one of Green's men alerted them to riders approaching. Lillian rushed to the porch, her heart in her throat as she strained to make out the figures in the distance. "Is it them?" she asked Marshal Davis, who stood beside her with a spyglass raised to his eye. "Two riders," Davis confirmed, Could be Lucas and Michael's. The minutes it took for the riders to come into clear view seemed endless. Finally, Lillian was able to recognize Lucas's broad-shouldered silhouette and the distinctive black gelding he rode. Relief swept through her so powerfully that she had to grip the porch railing for support. As they rode into the yard, Lillian could see that both men were tired but unharmed. Lucas dismounted quickly, handing the reins to one of Green's hands before striding toward the porch. His eyes found Lillian immediately, and the tension in his face eased. "Did you get it?" Marshal Davis asked, coming down the steps to meet them. Lucas nodded, reaching into his coat to produce a thick envelope. "Finch's documentation, just as we hoped. Deeds letters, even signed affidavits from ranchers who were forced off their land. Quinn's been forging documents and bribing officials to expand the Hawk Ranch beyond its legal boundaries." "And no trouble at the bank?" Davis pressed. "None," Deputy Michaels reported. "We went in, presented the key, and the clerk handed over the envelope without question. We were in and out in 10 minutes. It's what happened after that was interesting," Lucas added. "As we were leaving town, we spotted Quinn himself riding in with several of his men. They didn't see us, but they were heading straight for the sheriff's office." Davis frowned. "That could mean trouble. If Quinn's suspects were onto him, he might be planning to move against us. Or he could just be reporting to Sheriff Taylor as usual," Michaels suggested. "Quinn makes a point of staying on Taylor's good side." "Either way, we need to act quickly," Lucas said, his gaze moving back to Lillian. "The sooner we get Miss Palmer's statement and present this evidence to the territorial judge, the better." Marshal Davis nodded decisively. "We'll leave for Tucson at first light. The judge there will issue warrants once he sees this evidence, and I can deputize enough men to take Quinn and his gang into custody." As the men moved inside to examine the documents more closely, Lucas hung back, waiting for Lillian on the porch. "You came back," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Lucas's expression softened. "I made a promise, didn't I?" "Yes, you did." Lillian stepped closer, drawn to him despite the presence of others nearby. "I was worried." "It went smoothly," he assured her. "Though I'll admit, riding into Copper Springs knowing Quinn's men were looking for any connection to you was concerning. But you found what we needed," Lucas nodded. "Finch was thorough. He documented everything: land grabs, threats, even payoffs to local officials. With this and your testimony about the murder, Quinn won't escape justice this time." "And then what?" Lillian asked, the question that had been on her mind all day finally finding voice. Lucas looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" "After Quinn is arrested, after the danger is past, what happens then?" She held his gaze steadily, needing to know his thoughts about the future, their future, if there was to be one. Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes. "Ah," he said softly. "That's a conversation worth having properly, not standing on a porch with everyone waiting inside." He glanced toward the door, then back to Lillian. "Tonight, after dinner, we'll talk then." Lillian nodded, accepting the delay but already feeling lighter at his willingness to discuss what might come next. Dinner that evening was a celebratory affair. With the evidence secured and a plan in place, the mood around the table was optimistic. Thomas Green opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, and toasts were made to justice and to Mr. Finch's memory. As the meal concluded, Marshal Davis outlined their journey to Tucson, where they would present the evidence and Lillian's testimony to Judge Wilson, a man known for his strict adherence to the law regardless of a person's wealth or influence. "Once the judge issues warrants, I'll gather a proper posse," Davis explained. "Quinn has too many men for us to confront directly without sufficient numbers." "How long will all this take?" Lillian asked, concerned about the delay. "A week, perhaps 2, Davis admitted. "The wheels of justice turn slowly, even out here, but they do turn." As the evening progressed, the group began to disperse. Davis and his deputies retired to review the documents once more, while the Greens excused themselves to their room. Lillian found herself alone with Lucas for the first time since his return. "Shall we step outside?" Lucas suggested. "The night's clear, and I could use some fresh air after being indoors all evening." Lillian nodded, wrapping Martha's shawl around her shoulders before following Lucas onto the porch. The night was indeed clear, the sky above them a vast canopy of stars, more brilliant than anything Lillian had ever seen in St. Louis. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both gazing upward at the celestial display. "I never tire of this view," Lucas finally said, "no matter how many times I see it." "It's beautiful," Lillian agreed, "so different from the city." Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "You asked earlier what happens next, after Quinn." Lillian nodded, her heart beating faster. "Yes. The truth is, I haven't thought much beyond surviving this situation. My focus has been on keeping you safe." He paused. "But these past days being with you have made me consider possibilities I'd long since dismissed." "What possibilities?" Lillian asked softly. Lucas took a step closer, his voice low and earnest. "A life that's not solitary. A future shared with someone who understands both the darkness and the light in me." His hand reached out to take hers. "I know we've known each other only a short time, Lillian, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." Lillian's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Lucas, I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "Not yet. We both have pasts we're still reconciling with. But when this is over, when you're safe and Quinn is facing justice, I'd like the chance to court you properly. To see if what's growing between us can flourish in peacetime as it has during this storm." Relief and joy flooded through Lillian at his words. "I'd like that too," she admitted. "Very much." The smile that spread across Lucas's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and full of promise. He drew her gently into his arms, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I kiss you, Miss Palmer?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his tone. "I believe you may, Mr. Pearson," she replied, her own smile matching his as she tilted her face up to meet his descending lips. The kiss was different from their previous ones, less urgent, more tender, a seal on the possibilities they had just acknowledged. When they finally parted, Lucas kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "know that finding you that night was the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." Lillian's response was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, moving fast. Lucas stiffened, his posture instantly alert as he stepped in front of Lillian protectively. "Get inside," he ordered, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Now." Before Lillian could protest, the peaceful night erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out from the darkness beyond the yard, and a voice bellowed through the night. "We know you're in there, Palmer. Come out or we burn the place down." Quinn had found them. The next moments passed in a blur of motion and sound. Lucas pushed Lillian toward the door as return fire erupted from the house, Marshal Davis and the others responding to the attack. Inside, Martha was already gathering supplies, her face pale but determined. "The root cellar," she said, pointing to a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. "Quickly." "I won't hide while everyone else fights," Lillian protested. "This isn't about bravery," Lucas said firmly, having followed her inside. "It's about keeping you alive to testify against Quinn. If he kills you, he walks free." More gunshots sounded outside, followed by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. The attack was intensifying. "Go with Martha," Lucas instructed, checking his revolver. "I need to help Davis and the others." "Lucas," Lillian caught his arm, fear gripping her heart. "Be careful." He kissed her swiftly, then gently but firmly pushed her toward Martha. "I'll find you when it's over." Then he was gone, joining the men defending the ranch house. Martha pulled Lillian toward the trapdoor, revealing a small cellar beneath the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's well hidden," Martha explained as they descended the narrow steps. "Thomas had it built when we first settled here in case of Apache raids." The cellar was cramped but secure, with thick wooden walls reinforced with stone. Martha lit a small lantern, casting a warm glow over their refuge. Above them, the sounds of battle continued: gunshots, breaking glass, men shouting orders and warnings. "How did they find us?" Lillian whispered, huddled on a small crate. "Hard to say," Martha replied. "These territories are smaller than they seem. News travels, people talk." They sat in tense silence, straining to hear what was happening above. The gunfire was sporadic now, suggesting a standoff rather than an all-out assault. "Quinn." Marshal Davis's voice carried clearly, even to the cellar. "This is a federal marshal. Throw down your weapons and surrender." A harsh laugh was the only response, followed by another volley of shots. "We've got you outnumbered, lawman," came Quinn's reply. "All we want is the girl. Send her out and the rest of you can live." "That's not happening, Quinn." This time it was Lucas who shouted back. "Your murder of Finch is already documented. Killing more people won't save you from the hangman." A momentary silence followed this revelation, suggesting Quinn was conferring with his men. Then the shooting resumed with increased intensity. In the cellar, Lillian pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the terrifying sounds of battle. Martha placed a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Thomas and the others will protect us," she assured Lillian. "They're good men, all of them." The words had barely left her mouth when a tremendous crash sounded above, followed by the unmistakable roar of fire catching hold. Smoke began to seep through the floorboards above them. "They've set the house ablaze," Martha gasped, her composure finally cracking. Lillian stared up at the ceiling in horror. The men defending them would now have to choose between continuing the fight and escaping the flames. And she and Martha were trapped beneath the burning building. "We need to get out," Lillian said, rising to her feet. "Is there another way?" Martha shook her head. "Only the trapdoor. Then that's our way." Lillian moved toward the steps, her mind racing. "If the house is burning, Quinn's men will be watching the doors and windows. But they might not notice us coming up through the floor if we're careful." Above them, they could hear shouting and the crackling of flames. The smoke was growing thicker, making both women cough. "We have no choice," Lillian insisted when Martha hesitated. "We can't stay here and burn." With grim determination, they ascended the narrow steps. Martha went first, carefully pushing up on the trapdoor to see if the way was clear. The kitchen was filled with smoke, but no flames were visible yet. "Now," Martha whispered, pushing the door open fully and scrambling out. Lillian followed quickly, closing the trapdoor behind them to prevent the fire from spreading to their escape route if they needed it again. The house was in chaos. Through the windows, they could see men still exchanging gunfire. Green's ranch hands and Marshal Davis's group against Quinn's attackers. The front of the house was engulfed in flames, the fire spreading rapidly through the dry wooden structure. "This way," Martha urged, leading Lillian toward the back door. "If we can reach the stable, we might—" Her words were cut off as the door burst open, revealing a tall, lean man with a cruel face and a smoking revolver. "Silas Quinn." Well, well," he drawled, his eyes fixing on Lillian. "The missing witness. Thought you could hide forever, girl." Martha stepped in front of Lillian protectively. "Leave her be, Quinn. She's done nothing to you." Quinn's smile was cold as he raised his gun. "She saw what happened to Finch, that's enough." "Don't," Lillian cried, but it was too late. Quinn's revolver barked once and Martha crumpled to the floor. Lillian screamed, the sound lost in the chaos of the burning house. Quinn grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight as he dragged her toward the door. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, girl," he snarled. "Time to end it." Lillian fought, clawing and kicking as Quinn pulled her outside and around the side of the burning house. In the yard, the battle continued. Green and one of Davis's deputies were pinned down behind an overturned wagon, while several bodies Quinn's men lay motionless on the ground. "Quinn." Lucas's voice cut through the night. He stood at the corner of the house, his revolver aimed steadily at the rancher. "Let her go," Quinn laughed, using Lillian as a shield as he backed toward the waiting horses. "Not a chance, Pearson. She's my ticket out of here." "There's no escape," Lucas said, his voice calm despite the tension evident in every line of his body. "Davis has men coming from Tucson. It's over." "It's over when I say it is," Quinn growled, pressing the barrel of his gun against Lillian's temple. "Now back off or I put a bullet in her head right now." Lucas hesitated, his eyes meeting Lillian's. In that moment she saw something in his gaze, not defeat, but calculation. He was looking for an opening, waiting for his chance. "All right," Lucas said, lowering his gun slightly. "Just don't hurt her." Quinn's grip relaxed a fraction as he thought he'd won. It was the opening Lillian had been waiting for. With all her strength, she drove her elbow back into Quinn's stomach. The rancher grunted in pain, his grip loosening further. Lillian tore herself from his grasp, throwing herself to the ground as Lucas's revolver roared. Quinn staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell to his knees, his own unfired gun dropping from nerveless fingers. "You!" He gasped, staring at Lucas in disbelief before collapsing face first into the dirt. Lucas rushed forward, kicking Quinn's gun away before kneeling beside Lillian. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, helping her to her feet. "Martha," Lillian gasped. "Quinn shot Martha. She's in the kitchen." Lucas's face paled, but before he could respond, Marshal Davis appeared, his face streaked with soot and blood from a graze on his cheek. "The rest of Quinn's men are running or surrendered," he reported. "Is she all right?" "I'm fine," Lillian assured him. "But Martha's been shot." "And the house, Thomas and the hands are fighting the fire," Davis said. "Let's get Martha." They rushed back to the kitchen, finding Thomas Green already there, cradling his wife in his arms. To Lillian's immense relief, Martha was conscious, though pale from pain and blood loss. "The bullet went through her shoulder," Green said, his voice rough with emotion. "She needs a doctor, but she'll live." The next hours were a blur of activity. The fire was contained before it could destroy the entire house, though the front rooms were badly damaged. Quinn's surviving men were taken into custody, and the wounded, including Martha, were treated as best they could be with the limited medical supplies available. By dawn, a semblance of order had been restored. Quinn's body had been removed, and Marshal Davis had dispatched a rider to Tucson with news of the night's events, and a request for the territorial judge to issue formal warrants for the remaining members of Quinn's organization. Lillian sat on a bench outside the damaged house, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she watched the sunrise. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Too much had happened. Too many emotions warred within her: relief, grief for Mr. Finch, concern for Martha, and a deep, abiding gratitude that Lucas had survived the night's violence. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lucas appeared, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He sat beside her, offering one of the cups. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lillian accepted the coffee gratefully. I'm not sure, it doesn't seem real yet. It rarely does right after. Lucas took a sip from his own cup. But it is over. Quinn is dead and his operation will fall apart without him. And Martha, resting comfortably. Davis says she'll recover fully given time. Lillian nodded, relief washing over her. Good. She saved my life showing me the cellar. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the sun's first rays gilded the distant mountains. Despite the destruction around them, there was a peace to the moment that Lillian found herself treasuring. What happens now? She finally asked, echoing her question from the night before, though with a very different context. Lucas considered this. Davis will want your formal statement for the judge. After that, I suppose you're free to rebuild your life however you choose. There was a careful neutrality to his voice that hadn't been there before. Lillian turned to study his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. You sound as though you expect me to leave, she observed. Lucas met her gaze. Wouldn't you? After all this, I wouldn't blame you for wanting to put Arizona territory far behind you. Lillian set down her coffee cup, turning fully to face him. Is that what you want me to do? No, he said immediately, the word almost torn from him. No, that's not what I want at all. What do you want, Lucas? His expression softened, the guardedness falling away to reveal the depth of feeling beneath. I want you to stay. With me. I want to see if what started between us during these dangerous days can grow into something lasting in peacetime. He took her hand, his grip warm and sure. I meant what I said last night before Quinn attacked. I want the chance to court you properly, to build something real together. Lillian felt her heart expand with joy. That's what I want too. It won't be easy, Lucas warned. My cabin is small and the life out here is hard. Nothing like what you knew in St. Louis. I left St. Louis for a reason, Lillian reminded him. And I've found something here that I never had there, a sense of belonging. Not to a place, but to a person. She squeezed his hand. To you. The smile that spread across Lucas's face was like the sunrise before them, warm, brilliant, and full of promise. He leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of future mornings, future sunrises, future moments shared. When this is settled, he murmured against her mouth, when your statement is given and Quinn's men are brought to justice, will you come home with me, to my cabin? Yes, Lillian whispered, her heart full. Yes, I will. 2 weeks later, Lillian stood on the porch of Lucas's cabin, their cabin now, watching as he unloaded supplies from the wagon they had brought from Tucson. The journey back had been long but peaceful, a welcome contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. Their time in Tucson had been productive. Lillian had given her testimony to Judge Wilson, who had issued warrants for the arrest of Quinn's remaining men. Several had already been apprehended, and Marshal Davis was confident that the rest would soon follow. Martha Green was recovering well, according to the last telegram they had received. The Greens had promised to visit once she was strong enough to travel, a prospect Lillian looked forward to with genuine pleasure. That's the last of it, Lucas announced, carrying a final crate into the cabin. We're officially settled in. Lillian followed him inside, smiling at the changes they had already made to the small space. A colorful quilted gift from Martha brightened the narrow bed. New curtains hung at the window, and shelves Lucas had built now held Lillian's few books alongside his own. It wasn't grand, this life they were beginning together, but it was honest and it was theirs. Happy? Lucas asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Lillian leaned back against him, savoring his solid presence. More than I ever thought possible. His lips brushed her temple, a gentle caress that spoke volumes about his feelings. I never expected to find you, he murmured. That night when I was riding home and heard the commotion at the trading post, I nearly went the other way. But you didn't, Lillian said, turning in his arms to face him. "You came and you found me." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas said with a smile. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. "I have something for you." In his palm lay a simple gold ring, unadorned but beautifully crafted. Lillian's breath caught as she realized what it meant. Lucas, his eyes, those clear blue eyes that had been her first glimpse of safety on that terrible night, held her steadily. "I know it's soon," he said. "Perhaps too soon by the standards of proper society. But out here, life moves differently, and I've learned not to waste time when something matters." He took her hand, his expression solemn yet tender. "Lillian Palmer, will you marry me?" Tears of joy blurred Lillian's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close, his kiss a promise of all the days and nights to come. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the land they now shared. Within the cabin's sturdy walls, Lillian and Lucas embraced their future, bound together by a love forged in danger but destined to flourish in peace. From that fateful night when he had found her dress torn, her face cut, a woman in desperate need of safety, to this moment of quiet commitment, their journey had been neither simple nor easy. But as Lucas had promised that first night, she was safe now. Safe in his arms, safe in his heart, and safe in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. And for Lillian Palmer, who had once fled in fear from a man who sought to possess her, there could be no greater happiness than the freedom she had found in Lucas Pearson's love, a love that sheltered without confining, that strengthened without demanding, that had begun with a promise of safety and blossomed into a promise of forever.